Absolutely. You made lots of sense. I'll continue on the personal note to say that I came to food law. Originally, my academic theoretical home is gender. And gender was a frame through which I saw the world, and I could analyze many phenomena. And recently, when I discovered food law, I said, okay, this is my next intellectual home for the next few decades. And it makes me so happy to see that in almost every presentation there is a gender perspective, something about inequalities. We'll talk about it a little bit more later, but I just want to say that I now feel that I'm not betraying my past, that I moved to food law. So our next speaker will demonstrate the dazzling global nature of our panel. Just try to imagine, when I read his bio, try to imagine the map in the world in his itinerary. Julian Kinderlerer is professor of intellectual property law in Cape Town, a professor in Delft, the Netherlands, an honorary professor of bioethics law in the University of Sheffield in the UK. He is a member of the European Group of Ethics in Sciences and New Technologies that report to the European Commission, Council and Parliament on ethical issues. In the year 2000, he was seconded to the United Nations, now we're in New York, environment program to design and implement a project designed to assist developing countries develop the regulatory systems to comply with Carthage's protocols on biosafety that eventually involved over 130 countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Toda Rabba. I'll start very quickly in saying Toda Rabba le-Yael v'gam le-Dani that asked me to come and join you here, and I won't continue in Hebrew.
You could.
No, not to give a lecture. Just to add a little bit, I'm president of the European Group on Ethics now, and also currently advisor to the UN on extending what we're doing in relation to transgenics, mainly in the least developed countries. And the other thing I'll say as I start is I agree entirely with almost everything that Johnny said. I have some nuances, but basically we agree.
That's a rarity.
And that is almost unknown in our friendship of over 20 years. I thought, given the title of this session, I felt it necessary to actually spend a little time on IP law, primarily as I do that in Cape Town. I chose to go back to Cape Town some 10 years ago to work in an emerging economy and talk about innovation there, and therefore went back as a lawyer in the Department of Private Law in the University of Cape Town, leading a group on intellectual property law. And the question that I want to ask, and I felt needed to be asked given an ethical basis, is do we need IP rights in agriculture? And I'll address that over the next few minutes. I looked at the UPOV website. I haven't told you what UPOV is yet, so I won't go into that yet. But there were statements from the member countries of this international convention on plant variety rights. There can be no sustainable agriculture without innovation. Nobody disagrees with that. The intellectual property protection model put forward by UPOV is in harmony with the needs and expectation of our agricultural sector. Question mark. Those two don't necessarily follow, and we need to ask why. The Netherlands said governments worldwide are under pressure in the face of current and future global challenges to ensure sustainable food security and economic development. Of course. And therefore we need IP. Let's think about that as well. The UPOV website says, convinced of the importance attaching to the protection of new varieties of plants for the development of agriculture in their territory is a statement of fact. But the vast majority of farmers in the world are poor. They don't have the funds necessarily to buy new seed. Whilst agreeing with the point that it's much better to do so, they don't have the funds to do so. So we've got to find ways to ensure that they can get the seed that is more efficient, that doesn't have to be saved in the way that Johnny described. And if we can do that, we've met the needs of the farmers as well as the companies. And that's the essential question which we need to address. If you look at the South African Agricultural Research Council, that particular entity is obliged to ensure that the outcomes of its research and development initiatives are effectively disseminated to the farmers and people of South Africa. And it goes on to talk about the requirement to ensure sustainable and competitive agricultural production. The interplay of varieties from different parts of the world is important for the mitigation of agricultural risks. Again, obviously, particularly for developing resistance against specific pests and diseases. Exactly what Johnny said. So then let's think about those statements appeared on the websites of an organization which is committed to ensuring that if you use seed, you pay the developer for that seed. So how can we reconcile the two? Let's first talk about patents. It's new in agriculture. We didn't have patented seed outside the United States of America until fairly recently. Patents are possible on plants in most jurisdictions now. If the invention claimed is a characteristic given to a range of varieties, rather than simply the production of a variety of a plant. I wanted to stress that. You can't get a patent outside the United States on a new variety of a plant. But if you put a new gene in, and it can be across a number of varieties, then you can patent the gene in agriculture. So you can't patent a variety, you can a whole group of varieties. What we do, what Monsanto does, is to take a gene of interest, place it in a susceptible plant. It may not be the best commercial variety, a susceptible plant, and then use traditional agricultural techniques to get a crop that can be grown in a particular place with that new characteristics conferred by that gene. So you will have many varieties of a particular crop, let's say wheat, although there aren't any commercial wheats yet, or maize. You cross your new gene into a variety of maize that is grown in the area you want to grow it. And now you have a trait which is useful and the crop which will grow in that particular region of the world. That is protectable by a patent. I go on to say a patent is a negative right that permits the holder of that patent to stop others using the invention through a civil action in a court. Important because no matter where the patent is originally registered, it has to be registered in the country in which the farmer uses it, and the courts that will decide whether there has been a contravention are the courts of the country in which the contravention may have occurred. So if you develop a seed in the United States law doesn't apply when you grow it in Namibia. Namibian law applies. That's a serious issue because I was told by a senior member of the Namibian government that they thought that United States patents applied in their country. They don't. And that becomes really important a little later. What can we do about patents? Well, majority of patents are protected not by going to court, but through a licensing system that says, Monsanto has them, you buy my seed, you can use it under the following conditions. You have to observe the following conditions. You must use glyphosate. In many cases they will say you must use Roundup, not glyphosate. Glyphosate you can buy from anyone. They say you must use Roundup, which is made by Monsanto. And you must use it in the following way. And they specify very clear conditions in the license to the farmer as to what can and cannot be done. But wait a moment. They state you can't keep the seed no matter whether you want to or not, or whether it makes sense or not. For some crops it makes sense, for others it doesn't. You can't keep the seed because that is what is contained in the license. Buy your seed, you have to buy it new the following year. But the license could be different. For small-scale farmers, the license that we offer could theoretically at least be different to the one that we provide to large farmers. And that's where I think IP could really impact on African farmers, because we can identify the manner in which we license new varieties protected by patent, so that very small-scale farmers, who really are subsistence farmers without irrigation, have different conditions attached to the seed that they purchase when compared to large-scale farmers that use irrigation properly, even if it is drip feed. The license could specify that under certain circumstances the product offered by the company may be freely used and exchanged. Nobody's done that yet. Why not? Would it get more seed of good quality into the field? Yes. Could governments be involved? In Zimbabwe, the government buys all seed and distributes it to those farmers that vote for them, and nobody else. Maybe if the government bought the seed, you solve the problem of seed exchange, and we might be able to do a better job than we're doing now. So simply talking about patents as holding back agriculture is a seriously simplistic view of the way the patent system works. Let's go on. It's even more complex than we think. If you look at the European directive that applies, the European directive says the protection conferred continues into the next generation. And if your seed is in the farm next door and you've got the gene transferred by chance, by wind, or by bees, you're still liable for the patent. So there's a real problem there. Let me talk about UPOV for a moment. UPOV was established by the International Convention for the Protection of New Varieties of Plants. 61, 72, 78, and 91. There's 4 different conventions, and different countries belong to different parts of the convention. So France belongs to the 61 convention. Most countries and most African countries have been forced to belong to the 91 convention, which is much more, much stronger than the earlier versions of the convention. On July the 10th this year, the West African countries, that is the French-speaking countries, will have joined UPOV a few days' time as the 72nd member. And what you've got is a lot of countries, all French-speaking, that will have joined UPOV and will now be bound by the requirements of the plant variety regulations. They don't even know that they will be. But the point that I made, which is really important, that if there is a contravention of the convention, it is in the courts of each individual country that will be addressed. So that becomes important. 3 months earlier, a few months ago, UPOV assessed a draft regulation of the African Regional Intellectual Property Organization. That's a REPO. It's a different one. It's the English-speaking countries in the east of Africa. And their law, their draft, is in a conformity with the 1991 convention. So the East African organization is likely soon to become a member of UPOV. So another 19 countries will become members. The vast majority of African countries will be involved in plant variety registration, which creates issues for the use and transfer of seeds. It's okay to take a seed as a breeder and make a new variety freely in general. It's not okay for a farmer to do it. And there are many issues around that one. African countries aim to meet both the requirements of the World Trade Organization, because they joined it, and the UPOV requirements, but we need to have a system for farmers to access a wide range of improved varieties to contribute to the attainment of the regional goal of economic development and food security. It's a major issue which we need to think about a lot. I'll leave this, because you'll get copies of the slides, I hope, so I won't try and address that given I've run out of time. But the plant variety system of registration is opposed by almost every NGO. From Greenpeace through World Wildlife Fund, they say it's wrong. Farmers must freely be able to transfer seed as they have done for centuries. The system would outlaw centuries-old practices, freely using, exchanging and selling seeds and propagating material. Actually, I agree with Johnny's point on this one. They would like to have better seed. I was at a meeting once when a organic farmer stood up and explained to Kenyan farmers how great this concept of organic was. And a Kenyan farmer stood up and he said, you know, what you've described is what we've been doing for the last 500 years, and we're getting crap yields. Why should we still get crap yields? So we need to think seriously about the ways in which we can use these two systems, plant varieties and patents, to improve the lot of subsistence farmers by choosing the licensing methods we use. And nobody that I've heard of, in reality, is talking about modifying licensing to address these issues properly. Not modifying whether you have a patent or whether you have a plant variety right, but modifying the licensing depending on who or what type of farmer uses it. And that, I turn to you and say, is the ethical position that we should be taking. Thank you very much.